Ross Tucker joins us now to talk to us about that story that Martin Ziegler had yesterday about the amount of doping that's going on in underage rugby in South Africa. Ross, we just wanted to kind of try and get a sense from somebody who is on the ground in South Africa and kind of understands exactly what level the doping is at, because Ziegler had some very interesting stats for us yesterday and some very interesting anecdotes, which obviously are anecdotal, of parents and teachers injecting kids, their own kids and their students, to try and help them get to a point where they were going to be capable of winning professional contracts, which is a remarkable story really, Ross.
Yeah, it is, but sadly predictable given the way that rugby is structured in South Africa. I don't know whether this is the same everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if it were, but in this country, if you're going to get a professional contract, you need to be seen at 18. But if you want to be seen at 18, you have to be seen at 16. And if you want to be seen at 16, you have to have been seen at 13. So we've created what's basically a race to the bottom. And the consequence of that is that parents and kids and coaches are saying, how do I improve my chances of getting into that shop window? How do I improve the probability that a scout at the next level up will see me and identify me as a talented player? And the answer is I have to be bigger and stronger and faster. And so it would be interesting to know the evolution of how it works, whether the parent first says, let's look at diet. And that's what we're going to work on. And then with every good intention in the world, they soon recognize that diet might not do enough. So they say, let's try some supplements. And of course, that's got a ceiling. And eventually you make the decision, steroids. Or do they just go straight to doping? I don't know how that evolves, but the problem is we've created a race to the bottom, and parents with good intentions resort to not such good means to help get their kids ahead in life, as it were, as a rugby player.
This is genie out of the bottle territory, where everybody feels like everybody else is doing it, and so therefore it becomes the new normal. It's what happened cycling, effectively.
Yeah, it takes one person for the whole system to basically collapse in on itself, because if everyone stopped at diet, then in theory it's just me versus you. But if 5 boys start doping and then I start getting left behind, well then how do I catch up? And if the effect of drug use is that powerful, then you have to do it. You either give up and find another sport, or you don't and you take the drugs. And the problem in South Africa is that rugby is so much part of the psyche that young kids aspire to become Springboks, and they're going to go that way. And then layered onto that is the environmental changes, where, and this is a bold assertion, but it seems to me that steroids have never been as available as they are now. You could walk into any fitness club and probably pick them up just by looking at who's the biggest guy on the floor and striking up a conversation. So I think the free availability, the pressures to succeed younger and younger and younger, invites the parents to get involved. The coaches also get involved because there's tremendous prestige in winning at junior levels, and so the coach isn't going to stand in the way at best. At worst, he's going to contribute to it. It's just this perfect mixture of all the elements that you need for doping to happen.
Well, that thirst to succeed and that thirst to be bigger and stronger earlier is probably something that's not unique to rugby, and it's certainly not unique to rugby in South Africa. That's common with rugby in every single country. Are you surprised that potentially South Africa might be a more obvious example and an example that we've got a little bit more evidence to back up? Or do you feel that this is just kind of, to a certain extent, a little bit of an unfair reflection of South Africa, that it really is a worldwide problem?
Well, we test the boys at our annual competition. So here, I don't know how it works there in Ireland. I don't know how it works here in England, where I am at the moment, or in Australia, New Zealand. But we have a national schoolboy competition held every single year where the best players from each of the provinces go and compete. That is not the only window, but it's the main window at which the South African Rugby Union and the anti-doping authorities have the capability of testing those players. When those players play at their schools, they can't actually be tested unless the school initiates a testing program of its own, which sometimes does happen. But the reason I'm somewhat laboring that point is that in South Africa, we have a stage, a very specific period where the anti-doping authorities can go and test. They did this year 120 odd tests and they find 6 cases. So now we're in the dock basically as a function of having asked the question. I think, and I mean, I don't know this to be true, but I suspect that if other countries did the same thing, they would find the same result, that there is a doping problem in schoolboy rugby, because why would it be different in South Africa? And so I would imagine that this is a problem that exists globally, and I would hope that someone is going to take it upon themselves to look into it. I'm here in London actually at the moment attending a World Rugby Medical Conference, and one of the people attending it is the Chief Medical Officer of SA Rugby, and we spoke yesterday, and he has every intention of going to schoolboys next year and actually trying to do proper surveys of what is the extent of this problem, because testing, as you guys know, only scratches the surface of what's actually going on, and no one really knows the extent beneath the testing and what the testing can do. So we're in the unknown, but we know enough to know we have a big problem here.
Well, in Ireland, the schoolboy system is outside of the IRFU's control. So the IRFU controls the players who play for the academies, but up until they leave school, technically they're still schoolboy rugby players. Maybe there's some crossover, but as soon as you enter the academy, you come under IRFU control. Until the point where you get an academy contract, you are still under the control of the school, and there is no testing. It is exempt from drug testing in Ireland. So the notion that we're sitting here going, well, it's a South African problem and nothing, we're 100% whiter than white. Nobody here is saying that. And it would be very interesting to see what would happen if we started testing schoolboy rugby in Ireland.
Yeah, so you're raising, so that's the third thing. So you've got the talent ID pathway has driven almost doping as a way to get ahead. The environment has made drugs readily accessible for relatively cheap to the player and the parent and the coach. And then the third part, which you've just alluded to, is there's no testing. So you basically have this enormous reward with very little risk, and that's why the problem exists. So how you stamp this out is you're not going to educate these players out of doping, in my opinion. We've spoken about this, I think, a month ago. You can do everything you want around education. If the player sees that there's one pathway to get my professional contract, he's taking it. And so the only way you can really do it is you can stop him from doping by increasing the likelihood that he's going to get caught and then sanctioning him appropriately when he is caught. But neither of those two things is happening. And so we're just hoping that people's moral conscience will stop doping, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't work. It has never worked ever. Because their moral conscience that they're told everywhere else is succeed, don't be a loser, be a winner. Like, the pressure is precisely to cheat, not to be good.
Correct. Never quit. So when you start falling behind your peers in every strength and speed test, don't quit. Do what it takes. Keep up. And that's the problem. So, and of course, the system, as I said, rewards those characteristics. And so everything is just pointing in that direction. So the authorities really need to look at this and get a hold on it. But you're dealing with minors, and as you said, it's the same here in SA Rugby, is they can't go into the schools and test the players. They don't have jurisdiction or custodianship or whatever the legal term is to do that.
That would be an important step for the schools organisations to say, we want these competitions to be clean, and the only way we can do that is to say that we will test our players. Like, at that point you need the parents to say, yeah, okay, we're going to allow you to test, but are parents going to say, yeah, we trust that our minor and the information that you're going to get from these blood tests won't fall into the wrong hands? Like, it gets into that whole privacy and personal data issue, which is obviously a hot button topic as well.
Yeah, there's that. Plus, if 10% of parents are complicit in the doping of their kids, they're not going to give permission to test and expose themselves. So it's not going to work on that basis either. So it needs maybe strong leadership to navigate some of those issues, but it seems at this point to be an unsolvable problem.
And we don't know the scale of it. That's the last point on this before I just want to get your thoughts on the point that you're making about the Chief Medical Officer of the South African Rugby Football Union having a survey of the kids. Like, that's actually the most realistic and likely source for them to go, yeah, we're all doing it. This is how it happens. This is where you get it. Like, the intelligence gathering aspect of this is completely in its infancy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we Wing World Rugby did a survey at this year's Under-20 World Championships back in June, I think it was, asking the players the same thing. And there are methods of surveying now where you never have 100% confidence that the person is telling you the truth. I mean, if you ask someone, do you take drugs? Most people would not trust you, even if you guarantee them an anonymity to answer that honestly. But there are methods of doing surveys now. The IAAF and WADA did one in elite track and field athletes, which suggested that perhaps up to 40% of track and field athletes will admit to doping. And we applied that same model to the under-20 rugby championships this year. And the intention in my discussion yesterday was that he would be looking at doing the same. And I hope that we can actually encourage other countries, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, New Zealand, Australia, to look at doing the same thing so that we can get a global picture of what this problem looks like. It's very difficult to solve a problem if you don't know the scale of it, because you never know where you stand. And so this is the first step that has to be taken.
And what was were the results ever made public from the under-20 survey?
Still being looked at, I think. I chatted yesterday to the guy who did that. I hope by the end of this year that is published, or at least made available.
Yeah, okay, well that will be really interesting, because there's definitely ways of asking people questions about what they think their competitors are doing, which kind of gives you an insight into what they think, where the moral bar is set, you know, like that. It is that whole kind of notion. Do you think everybody else in this race is clean? Yes, no, if not, why not? And it's like, well, because, you know, like that's where I think some of the surveying starts to get a bit more sophisticated. I did want to ask you about the situation with WADA at the moment. It's interesting that finally people are waking up to the whole notion of the way that WADA was constituted being completely wrong in the first place. I'm so exhausted by these stories that I'm not quite sure that a solution will be delivered that is the right solution, that and some other kind of fudge isn't on the agenda here that we haven't yet seen.
There's definitely an apathy, because the conversation has been going for years. You've had it longer than I've had it, and the latest is this challenge that's been issued. There's a meeting at the White House. People are saying WADA is not fit for purpose. The same stuff is coming up, but you get the impression, having read, and I'm sure you read it, the response that the head of WADA, Craig Reedy, in response to the cycling calls, the Becky Scott, who stood down as the athletes chair or the commission chair, you get the impression that they don't really care and that they know that there's no change imminent. And so there's an apathy around the discussion that just leaves us gridlocked. What's changing?
Yeah, that's definitely what feels like it's going to happen. So, is there any way that WADA could actually be fixed, or is that just a completely ridiculous notion at this point?
It seems like the structure at the top there between the IOC and WADA is that WADA is too weak to do the job. Well, it's not been set up to do the job, but it's been set up well enough to survive. And so it's like hanging from the fingertips, and it's strong enough to hold itself there, but not strong enough to climb back up onto the ledge. And that's the stalemate that we seem to be in. And I mean, I can't believe, with the number of attacks on WADA's integrity in the last 4 or 5 weeks since their actions on Russia, and the criticism from athletes, from other anti-doping agencies, yet the same people are in charge, and they will be in charge all the way to the next Olympic Games. It's actually astonishing. Imagine a company accused of the negligence that WADA was. The board and the leadership of the company wouldn't survive, but nothing changes. It's interesting, I'm going to Rome next week, actually. WADA invited me to attend a scientific conference on the biological passport and the future of that tool. I hope saying this doesn't get me uninvited, but the interesting thing is the tools that WADA had, the science, the biological passport, that stuff is now secondary, tertiary in the debate. The big issue seems to be the political conflicts and the agendas that undermine WADA at the very top, you know, the leadership issues. So we can have meetings about what WADA needs to do and how the testing can improve and what the sanction needs to be, that you should put tramadol on the banned list, that you should take this substance off and put that on. That's looking for pennies on the floor. And the big issue is the €100 note sitting here on the table, and that's political trust is zero. There's absolutely no leadership trust in WADA at the moment. And until someone can wrestle that leadership away, it won't change. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, maybe a sport or a set of sports can say we're no longer going to be signatories to WADA because we've had it. We're fed up. We don't trust that they're going to deliver anti-doping. And what we're going to do is we're going to allocate 2%, 5% of our revenues to set up an independent body, which is then going to regulate and oversee us. And we're going to be separate from WADA. So in the same way that the NFL and the NBA are not members of WADA, so they do their own anti-doping, it might get to a point where sport breaks away from WADA. But is sport going to play hostage games with its own Olympic participation? Because that's what they potentially put on the line. So I don't know, but it's maybe we're getting to a tipping point, but it feels like we aren't.
That wouldn't necessarily make things any better, Ross, breaking away and in-house anti-doping.
No, because eventually you'll end up in the same position. Because someone's always being paid by someone else. And the moment there's a transaction like that, there's a conflict. So I don't know how you'd set it up. You'd have to set it up to actually incentivize them to catch you. So imagine me paying you to catch me.
Yeah, it's not going to work. Definitely not going to work.
There's a paradox there.
Yeah, you end up with like 1-game bans for people taking steroids, like, or 2-game bans, or the NFL substance abuse policy has been abused. It's 4 games. Like, he misses a quarter of the season and he's back looking buff and happy and had a rest. You're at the World Rugby Conference on concussion, I think. Are there any early indications yet of the change in the tackle rule having a positive impact on the numbers, or is it far too early and too small a sample size?
Yes to both. So the conference is our annual medical meeting. We meet every year roughly this time, and we discuss, among other things, concussion obviously being the hot button. We have data now from the world's major club competitions, and certainly we previously saw an increase every single year in concussion numbers. For the first time, and this is true across all competitions, that's either leveled off or come down. So we're encouraged by that, but we also understand that one season alone is not enough because there's so many other things changing. At those under-20 champs early this year, we saw a 50% reduction in the concussions, but it's only a 30-match tournament. So we're encouraged enough to say that we're heading in the right direction, but we have to constantly reinforce the message because, as you know, every single week, or it seems like, there's a controversy around a card or a sanction, and there's considerable pushback from one side and pushing forward from the other. And so trying to manage some of those tensions is the main challenge at this stage, I think, working towards consistency of sanction. But we're confident enough that we're going in the right direction. Whether we're going fast enough is another question.
Yeah, okay. Well, that small sample size is a good and positive indicator, because we're talking about the future of the game. If it doesn't get under control, parents are going to start really questioning whether or not they can send their kids to play, and that becomes this kind of vicious circle that you really can't ever interrupt. So any way of interrupting the number of concussions is going to be seen as a massive positive.
Yeah, and so we're committed to that. I think everyone is, and I think that the research that was done and the initiatives that come off it, the question now is one of degree, because we had those 3 phases. Phase 1 was harsher sanction. Phase 2 is to try and do it post-match and do it as almost a high tackle sighting, which we're exploring at the moment in a big study. And phase 3 is what's being researched soon in the English Championship Cup competition, where they're actually going to literally lower the height of the tackle. So the question is, which of those achieves the desired change without changing too much? The big paradox in this issue always is, how do you change without change? Because there comes a point where you change the sport and then people will reject it. So you want to change the injury risk without basically compromising the DNA of the sport. And that's a tricky balance to find.
Well, best of luck with that, Ross. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
No, it's good. Thanks again.